why you, me, everyone we know going forward will spend hundreds of billions of pounds sorting out the European Union's migrant mess. And you know what? It still won't work. Also, how much are you willing to pay for net zero? After climate scientists warn that households could pay at least double the £4,000 price tag mentioned in the government review to hit that 2050 target, Red Wall MPs are now urging the Prime Minister to scrap the target entirely. Are we in referendum territory, people? That's what I want to know. And an investigation by the Daily Mail exposes the NHS's gender guidance, which critics say promotes extremist political views on gender theory. In the NHS, never. Extreme trans ideology has seemed to find a home within the guidelines as well. Of course it has. From inclusive ward policies to emergency call operators forced to ask about the caller's pronouns before they save their lives. You couldn't make this madness up. Plus, 2 years on from the Taliban seizing power, how has Afghanistan fared? The Taliban has banned women from doing most jobs, barred girls from secondary schools, parks, gyms and universities. They are very obviously still an absolutely whopping great big terror threat. I will sit down with the first British Afghan elected official, Peymana Assad, who was visiting family in Kabul when the Taliban takeover began and was forced to flee the country. I asked, was it all worth it? And the answer, I suspect, is no. Fascinating to hear what the mums of dead soldiers make of Tony Blair as well. Unflushable, isn't he? State of the Nation starts now. I will also be joined by a particularly pugnacious panel this evening. We do have historian and broadcaster Dr. Tessa Dunlop and research fellow at the Bow Group, conservative think tank Benjamin Loughnane. They are obviously not going to get on, which should be fun. Remember, we want to hear from you. The email remains the same, mailmog@gbnews.com. Get in touch, get yourself on the telly. But right now it's time for the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom tonight, Norfolk and Suffolk police have admitted that the personal information of over 1,000 people, including victims of crime and witnesses, was mistakenly released in response to freedom of information requests. Both forces have attributed the mistake to a technical issue. In a joint statement, the forces said the data was hidden from anyone opening the files issued between April 2021 and March 2022. The Prime Minister has said that with wages rising at their fastest level for 22 years, there's now light at the end of the tunnel. Figures from the Office for National Statistics show wages rose by 7.8% in the last quarter, with inflation standing at 7.9%. Rishi Sunak has said bringing inflation down is still his government's key priority. Any rise in rail fares in England next year will be below the rate of inflation. The Department for Transport says the increase will not be as high as the rise in the retail price index, which normally dictates all rail fares. The government has vowed to continue to protect rail passengers with the soaring cost of living. Any rises will be delayed until March next year rather than being brought forward in January. Now, the Home Office has exclusively revealed to GB News there's been a huge increase in undocumented migrants exploiting rules to work in the food delivery sector. It says restaurants and small businesses offering delivery services are being urged now to carry out more detailed checks on their drivers to crack down on scams. Home Office officials say working in the shadow economy, as it's called, is a major pull factor for those embarking on often dangerous illegal journeys to the UK. NHS hospitals in England are to get a £250 million boost from the government. That's to increase capacity as part of the Urgent Emergency Care Recovery Plan. The money's going to create 900 beds to relieve pressures and help cut waiting times. 30 NHS organisations will benefit from the investment. The majority of schemes will be completed by January to help deal with winter pressures. Now, today marks 2 years since the Taliban took control of Afghanistan following the withdrawal of Western allies. Well, people demonstrated outside Parliament in London earlier on today in solidarity with Afghans who oppose Taliban rule. Aid organisations have also urged government ministers not to abandon the Afghan people. This is GB News across the UK on your TV, in your car, on your digital radio, and now on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Well, despite Brexit, Britain is still dealing with the mess the European Union created with open borders. This talk of us striking some kind of returns agreement with the EU is absolute rubbish. It's never going to happen. It's complete fantasy. The whole time we're in the EU, there were rules in place that were supposed to mean that people stayed in the first safe country that they arrived in. That obviously didn't happen. The idea that we could get help from the EU now to deal with the Channel migrant crisis is not even on the table. But for the first time, we are starting to see even the most ardent Europhiles waking up to the fact that they have created a complete and utter monster here, and that there are huge problems associated with mass, uncontrolled, illegal and legal immigration. A little earlier on, I spoke to the deputy leader of the Rejoin the EU party, Richard Morley, from Berlin, obviously. Now, he let it slip that they are dealing with, quotes, the consequences of immigration. And I thought, hang on a minute, I want to drill down on that. You said that having immigrants all around you is causing problems. What problems?
Well, it's causing economic problems. It's causing, in particular, housing problems. There isn't enough housing or doctors or schools to be able to facilitate a sudden intake of hundreds of thousands and probably millions of immigrants into a nation. The system simply can't cope with.
You do it then.
Why did who do what?
Why did the European Union let it happen? Why did the likes of Angela Merkel allow 1 million people from the Middle East just in? If it's caused all these problems that everyone was saying, this is going to be the problem, this is what's happening, and you did it, and now you're dealing with the consequences, now you want us to go and pay to rebuild their countries to stop more people coming.
This is not something which can be so easily controlled as we can see ourselves.
Well, no, not if you've got open borders, not if you're willing to welcome everybody in and make no provisions for it. EU lovies are now, as you can see, waking up to the reality that tens of millions of people are going to try to move to Europe in the coming years. They are obviously going to try and wave as many of them as possible through to Britain. The ship has sailed, the horse has bolted, they created a vicious immigration death spiral that will forever change Europe, and they were stupid enough to let that happen. So what's their solution now? And I think this is the important bit. I will tell you what will end up happening. Britain and the EU will spend hundreds of billions of pounds worth of taxpayers' money making African and Middle Eastern countries nicer and better in a completely futile attempt to reduce the need for economic migration, which they now admit it is, by the way, economic migration. They will also say that the climate crisis is causing a lot of migration, so we'll have to pay to solve that as well. And, of course, we will also have to pay for the problem that we're already facing here. So, mark my words, the grand plan to save Europe from a problem that the European Union created will be to bankrupt Europeans in order to save the world. But, of course, I want to know your thoughts on that. Don't forget to let me know what you think. Mail Mogg at GBNews.com. Before I go to my esteemed panel, one of which already has her head in her hands, joining me now to discuss this is former Shadow Home Secretary and former MEP, Anne Widdecombe. Anne, thank you very, very much. We are not going to get any kind of returns deal from Brussels, are we, unless we have to pay through the nose for international cooperation to make rubbish places nicer?
Well, quite honestly, you could pay through the nose and you still wouldn't get a returns policy. And what really does upset me is that we're going to pay £480 million to France. We have already paid them goodness knows how many million, and they have given us absolutely nothing in return. Let us remember that when we had that horrible tragedy last week, the boat was still in French waters, comfortably in French waters, and they went on escorting it towards British waters. They have absolutely no conscience on this issue. They've no interest in helping Britain, and we're on our own. And that is the first thing to face and give up expecting cooperation from France. Very nice if it comes, but don't expect it. Number one. Two, you've got to deter people from coming here. At the moment, they think that if they come to Britain, the chances are very, very minimal that they'll ever be removed, because we don't practice routine detention, Patrick. We don't have national identity cards. We do have a flourishing underground economy, and it's one of the easiest places in the West, if not the easiest, in which to disappear. Now, that is the pull factor that is going on. That is why people who are in a perfectly safe country like France are still trying to get here, because they know they can stay here and they probably wouldn't be able to stay in France. So, we've got to reverse that message. So, I mean, Rwanda will help, but Rwanda is a long way from fruition. And in between that, we've got to do what I've been calling for 20 years, which is automatic detention of every single new asylum seeker in a secure reception centre, not a centre they can just go out and wander around the town from, in a secure reception centre. And then the message goes out. You come to Britain with a genuine claim, you're of course welcome. You come here with a false or a flimsy claim, you'll be detained, you'll be dealt with quickly, you'll be sent back.
I was actually quite surprised to hear our friend who loves the European Union, based in Berlin, clearly, earlier on, saying that they now recognise that there are actually massive problems with mass immigration, but that they believe that the only way to solve that is to reduce the need for economic migration, which does mean us trying to rebuild countries or just make those countries in Africa or the Middle East nicer, which we would all be paying for. They also hide behind the climate crisis, which, again, we would all be paying for. Is Europe going to bankrupt itself trying to save itself from mass immigration, despite the fact that, frankly, the horse has bolted?
Well, let Europe do what it will, but we mustn't get sucked into that. The idea that we can deter migration by making other countries all nice and wonderful and democratic and free from corruption, frankly, is cloud cuckoo land. Even if we could do it, it would take far too long. And I don't just mean a couple of decades, I mean many decades to achieve that. That is not the answer. That is some sort of fanciful notion of people who are bankrupt of every other idea. Now, either we take this seriously, forget Europe, forget France, forget what they're doing. We take responsibility for ourselves, and that'll be the day when Rishi Sunak does that.
And look, thank you very, very much. What a way to kickstart the show. It's the wonderful Anne Widdecombe there. Now, I, of course, do have my fabulous panel with me. I've got historian broadcaster Tessa Dunlop, and I've got the Bow Group's research fellow for migration, Benjamin Lockney. Now, it's worth noting that Tessa has soldiered on in despite losing her voice. I will not make a joke about that. Right, Tessa, you had your head in your hands whilst I was talking about this. We're going to end up being asked to be the world's piggy bank to try to save ourselves from a problem that's already existing.
Luckily, you're right, I do have a sore throat. Let's see, I'm going to push through. It is bad, much worse than it was an hour ago.
Worse for people listening on radio.
Oh, dear, I do apologise. I want to share, therefore, just give one example to help with some light over heat, which I think Anne gave us lots of heat there, and your introduction was hot.
Thank you.
I want to give the example of a country now in the EU, but whose diaspora was record-breaking, Romania. One of the triggers for Brexit was we were panicked about too many Romanians being in this country. Proportionally, something like 20% of their population lived abroad. They were busted flush. Coming out of Ceausescu's Romania after the revolution, I know, because I know the country very well. They have subsequently had billions of euros worth of investment. In the current tranche, 35 billion. Their economy is growing at 4.8%, and their migrants are returning, on top of which they are pulling in over 100,000 for the first time ever, immigrants from all over the world. That is an example of what happens when you rebuild a country. You build back better.
Do we not? But do we not have much more of a shared culture with Romania than we do, say, vast parts of Africa or indeed the Middle East?
Well, absolutely. The closer you are to somewhere, the more you have in terms of shared culture and shared history and religion and so on and so forth. But I do think there's some merit to the idea that if you invest in certain countries or if they're better places to live, fewer people leave. But it won't resolve the issue. I mean, fundamentally, as long as Britain is wealthier than any of those countries, people will still want to come here. And until all of those places are made as wealthy or more wealthy than Britain, they won't want to. They'll continue to come.
Go on.
Two things. In terms of our investment, we have had such a hand, an imprint on Afghanistan. Let's not pretend otherwise. Not just in this century, but for 2-3 centuries.
It's been terrible.
So you can't just say, oh, well, Romania are near neighbours. Actually, in terms of our input and the money spent, we're far closer
to Afghanistan. It's worth noting that those who died in the Channel at the weekend were from Afghanistan. And I think one of the things, one is we left the Dublin Convention because of Brexit. And if you ask a lot of people waiting to cross from Calais, they'll say, well, our country of entry was Romania or Hungary. We don't want to stay there. And France won't let us stay here because they'll send us back to Romania or Hungary. And so we're coming to Britain. So it's wrong to say that we couldn't or didn't in the past be able to send people back, because we could. We've weakened ourselves.
What I thought, and what I think the point that Anne made there that was really good was that, look, we should stop waiting for any help from Europe, and we should just control our own borders.
Well, also, the incentives that we provide for people to come here in the first place, it's not just about saying let's make those countries better, it's let's make our country less of such an agreeable prospect for people to come. Because if you roll out the red carpet...
Well, we've done that by crashing the economy.
That's a fantastic idea, yeah. Let's all suffer for the same reason.
The other countries.
But I'm talking more about rolling out the red carpet, putting people up in hotels, paying them an allowance every week.
That's not true anymore,
but it is.
We give them Legionnaires' disease.
Come on. No one got Legionnaires' disease. It was found and they were immediately evacuated. It's come on, that is dramatic. But frankly, if we stopped incentivising this and we had eliminate the pull factors, increase the deterrence, people won't come. It's as simple as that.
I also think, and we hobbled ourselves in terms of our soft power. We reduced our international aid budget. We used to give 0.7% of our GDP. Now it's down to 0.5%.
But now we're spending a lot of that on the actual channel migrants. That's where we actually end up, which is in a way foreign aid.
It is foreign aid,
housing them in our hotels, so the money's going back into our system.
All right. Well, look, we're off to a flyer. Bottle it. Now, don't forget that you can let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. It's lively. Coming up, do you think that we should have a referendum on net zero? Let me know what you think. Plus, did colonialism cause a societal divide between men and women? Stay tuned.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I am still not Jacob Rees-Mogg, but one day I hope to have his bank account. But this is still State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Thank you very much, everybody. Tom's been on. It says the EU would soon come round and agree to take back channel migrants if we use the Brexit EU divorce settlement payments to pay all of the UK's costs for illegal immigrants here. Lynn says, I'm sick to death of being last in my own country. It's a problem that a lot of people feel, Lynn. It is a problem that a lot of people feel. It's a sad problem to have. They have no intention of stopping the boats. One more. Jill says, if the French are not playing ball, give us our money back. I mean, you know, I was going to say, well, maybe we should invade them to get it. But, yeah, it can't really happen, could it? Why? Because they'd retreat. No, all jokes. Old jokes. But following Rishi Sunak's move to make issues like ULEZ an election dividing line with Labour, today a number of Red Wall MPs are urging the Prime Minister to get a step further and offer voters the chance to scrap net zero entirely. They say that given the complexity of the issue and the sheer level of costs that this will have on the general public, a proper government debate should be held on the matter. Tory MPs in the North and in the Midlands, in particular, fear that it could cost them their seats at the next general election. Well, earlier this year, climate scientists warned that households could potentially face expenses that are at least twice the £4,000 price tag mentioned in the government's assessment, all in the pursuit of achieving the UK's net zero objectives. And it's stuff like that that I wonder warrants a referendum. I am joined now by motoring journalist, that should say royalty, Quentin Wilson. Quentin, thank you very much. Great to have you in the studio. Look, start with the simple questions, I suppose. Should we have a referendum on net zero?
Well, who's asking for this referendum? Is it the 60 million people in the UK, or is it this, as you described, hardcore of right-wing backbench Tory MPs? And we hear their voices again and again and again trying to derail 2030 and 2050. So I would say, in all respect, that that is not the voice of the nation.
I mean, we could find out. I suppose the argument would be that did people know what the costs were going to be? I mean, for example, if you're told initially that if you have a net zero home and you're going to save £6,000, but then you realise that the cost of replacing your boiler and buying electric cars actually outweighs that significantly, did you know what you were signing up for by 2050?
But we don't know that, do we, by 2050? Because the price of boilers, heat pumps and electric cars is going to come down significantly, as they have in the last, 10 years. That progress in 27 years is going to be huge. And we will make lots of money out of net zero as an influential nation that uses this technology for exports and changes assumptions.
We are asking people to believe a promise that has yet not come to fruition. So, for example, like the infrastructure, not enough grid capacity to support electric upgrades, despite the government's plans. We've got Energy Watchdog Ofgem warning households are being blocked from making net zero upgrades to their homes due to a lack of that electricity supply. I understand that it might happen one day, but it might not, and then we'd be screwed.
But the National Grid, and I talk to them regularly, say, look, if everybody had an electric car now and all plugged in, the increase in electricity would only be 10%. They're confident that they'll be able to do this. And this 27 years, we can do so much. So why is this coterie, and I think that's the right word, of right-wing MPs who are afraid of their constituencies with declining majorities asking for this? And these are ambitious men who want to put themselves in the public eye. And this is a generational thing. And we cannot afford to just squander it because of a few MPs who are making a lot of noise.
You say that, but, I mean, it's not just a right-wing thing, is it? I mean, Labour lost, and they did lose, that Uxbridge by-election based around an expansion to ULEZ, OK, which is a bit of a net zero issue. So, really, if anyone wants to keep their seat, it's not just the right-wing Tories, is it?
No, I know, but and ULEZ is a badly crafted thing at the wrong time, and I don't agree with it. And I think the science of ULEZ is questionable too. And it's no surprise that they won. But look, if we're talking about dismantling what is a public health initiative that 130 other countries have signed up to because Little Britain thinks they want a referendum.
Have they put a date on
mad.
it?
2050.
All 130 countries?
It varies slightly, but it's all in that broad time frame.
OK, when it's about the popularity of net zero, a lot of people like to say, well, the vast majority of the public supports it. And it's interesting because when you look at the questions that the public are really asked, it's things like, currently the government is aiming to reduce Britain's carbon emissions. Do you support this aim? Well, 71% of people say yes to that because you'd be a bit of a monster if you said no. But then you ask them, well, currently new gas boilers are expected to be phased out from 2035. Do you support or oppose this aim? And people all of a sudden have to consider whether or not they can pay for one. Well, then all of a sudden only 42% support that. Then you say to them, the sale of new petrol and diesel cars are due to be banned from 2030. Do you support that? And they think, grief, I'm going to have to pay for that as well. Then again, total opposed is 47%. So do you think people really support net zero?
But you can use these surveys to demonstrate anything. And look, we know with electric cars that, they have become very popular. The Tesla Model Y is the best-selling car, not just electric car, in the world. There's a great body of people out there who are afraid of climate change, of what it's doing. They see the news, the wildfires, the floods, the biblical rains, and they want us to do something about it. And for parliamentarians, and I think this is a really important point, for parliamentarians to deliberately, wantonly and mischievously destroy this laudable initiative, environmental initiative, which will lead to better public health, is scandalous.
Will it lead to better public health? I mean, I was having a look at some of the stats last night, actually, about certainly when it came to clean air zones and ULEZ, and they said initially that it's going to take years and years, thousands of people are going to die younger as a result. And you actually look at it, and one of the things was that it might take about 3 days off your life.
There's a huge body of evidence that the particulates, the diesel particulates, PM2.5s, and the nitrogen dioxide in the air has a clear relationship to cancer, heart disease, respiratory disease. I mean, this is not in question. So it's about clearing the air we breathe, for you, for me, for our children and their children. And this is historic. And for these guys to try and take a lump hammer to all this is totally, totally wrong.
But what would you be afraid of, though? Because you've made a series of points here, very clearly, very, intelligently. Surely, if we had a referendum, you could put that to the nation and you'd win.
But if you say to people, shall we have a referendum on not paying tax? Shall we have a referendum on not paying VAT? Shall we have a referendum on not having planning permission? They're all going to say, yes, let's get away with all these things. Let's sweep it away. Let's have a free society.
But fundamentally, if the people don't care, then they don't care.
Well, do they care or don't they care? If we'd had a referendum on the Clean Air Act in 1956 and they said no, millions of people would have died. So look, you need these nudges. You need this policy to give industry certainty, but also to make sure that we don't, like lead in petrol and benzene in petrol. Would we have had a referendum on that? People would have said, yeah, let's carry on buying it because it makes it cheaper. So there are things like this, which is of monumental historic importance to society, that we need to persevere with and not let these right-wing backbench MPs destroy. It's mischievous.
Well, we say right-wing backbench MPs. I'm going to pick you up again on the idea that Labour might now be rowing back on it because they got an absolute kicking in Uxbridge. But just a quarter of Brits say that they would take a financial hit to accelerate the eco-pledge before 2050. And I think this is the important thing, isn't it, for people? At the moment, people might agree with you that they think this is a big issue, this is a huge issue. But if I'm going to go skint in order to be able to pay for this, whilst China's doing goodness knows what, then I'm not going to do it. I mean, the figures are here, just a quarter of Brits. And this is the kind of thing I think the public should be consulted about. As the true costs of this emerge to people, should they not be having a more robust discussion?
We don't know what those true costs are.
That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, but look, the benefits are, better jobs, electrification, hydrogen, more nuclear, more onshore wind. This will create, Jeremy Hunt said £1 trillion worth of economic opportunity. So look at the benefit to people's lives in quality of jobs, quality
the unions
of wages.
don't think so, do they? GMB up in Scotland, they're dead against this.
Well, with respect, they would say that because of the oil industry and
because of their jobs.
Yeah. But look, we've got to make those jobs better paid, better skilled, and we've got to take people on this journey. But look, it's not going to be without pain, but it is critically important. The alternative is to do nothing, carry on burning what we're doing, carry on making all this pollution, and then nobody goes forward and we're Little Britain and the rest of the world is laughing at us. And people are, huddling round their gas fires.
Interesting stuff. All right, look, great stuff. I've thoroughly enjoyed having you on and a bit of back and forth. You can't beat it, actually. Fantastic stuff. Quentin, thank you very, very much. Quentin Wilson there. Of course, motoring royalty. As I was saying, make sure that you get your views coming in on all of this as well. Mail Mogg at GBNews.com. Coming up, have the NHS stuck their foot in it? Plus, I will be talking to a London councillor who fled Afghanistan during the invasion. I tell you what, it doesn't feel to me anyway like 2 years ago that horrific white flag of not surrender, but the Taliban's flag started fluttering again over the streets of Kabul. I'll be back in a second.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, most areas enjoyed a dry day on Tuesday, and it's more of the same as we head into Wednesday. Dry and fine for many. Yes, there will be some isolated showers around, but most places will be dry and in that sunshine, feeling quite warm. We look at the pressure pattern then, you can see it's all thanks to this area of high pressure that continue to build in across the country. That's what's settling things down, and that's what's going to lead to a dry night tonight for the vast majority. Clear skies across England and Wales, Northern Ireland, but a bit more cloud across parts of Scotland with a few showers continuing at least through the start of the night. But under those clear skies, we could see one or two mist and fog patches, and also turn quite chilly as well in some rural spots, temperatures falling into single figures in more prone spots. But in towns and cities, temperatures holding up 10 to 13 degrees Celsius. So under those clear skies, we get off to a fine start for much of the country, some early sunshine. Any mist and fog patches are lifting quite readily. Again, we hang on to a bit more cloud across parts of Scotland with a few showers here continuing throughout the day. Elsewhere, we could see one or two isolated showers, but again, you'll be fairly unlucky to catch one. Most places will be dry with sunny spells as we head into the afternoon. In that sunshine, feeling warm, temperatures ranging from 14 across the far north, but widely into the low to mid-20s, 26 degrees there towards the southeast, feeling warm in those light winds. More of the same as we head into Thursday. Most places will be dry, a bit more cloud towards the east coast at first, that burning back to the coast. Elsewhere, increasing amounts of sunshine, feeling very warm as well, particularly towards the west, just isolated showers once again. It turns warmer still as we head into Friday. Temperatures could reach the high 20s, but without an increasing chance of heavy showers and thunderstorms.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. I remain Patrick Christys, and you've been getting in touch in your droves with your thoughts on that last chat I had about a net zero referendum. Let's take a little look, shall we? Ian says, they will never hold a net zero referendum because it's a no-brainer. The majority will vote to postpone the 2050 deadline. Look, Ian, I suspect you're right, but there are massive issues. What would the question be at a net zero referendum? I mean, there's so many different things. What is net zero? How long do you postpone it for? Etc., etc. Mairead says, we must have a referendum to reveal the facts and debate the arguments. I'm inclined to agree with you. That would be nice, although we could have conversations like we've just had on this show and do them a bit more publicly as well, and our politicians not just lie to us, usually in front of some kind of fake green tree somewhere near Greta Thunberg. Jeffrey says, we will never be allowed another referendum on anything. Look, Jeffrey, you're absolutely bob on, I suspect. And also, let's say that people voted to postpone net zero. By the time that they'd implemented that referendum, we'd have ended up doing it anyway, wouldn't we? Because it would probably be 2065. But moving on, an investigation conducted by the Daily Mail has shed some light on the NHS's approach to gender issues. Now, according to NHS internal guidance, the societal divide between men and women is attributed to colonialism. I guess that's good then. I mean, the end of British colonialism is commonly signified by India's independence 76 years ago. Given the fact that a load of NHS nurses are indeed Indian-born women, I think we might have smashed that barrier. Or maybe simplifying the divides in gender to a long past. Irrelevant practice is a well-designed scapegoat to hide the real threat to feminism, which is, in my view, extreme trans ideology with no basis in reality. And, you guessed it, the internal guidance is chalked full of that stuff as well. Individuals who occasionally decide to be a woman for the day, literally for the day, are allowed into female-only wards. Midwives have received guidance to avoid referring to trans parents giving birth as actual mothers. And 999 operators are directed to ask about emergency callers' pronouns to avoid potential misgendering. I would argue then it's not an emergency, is it? But every second is crucial in a life-threatening situation, which unsurprisingly is par for the course for those 999 operators. The suggestion that they should waste their time inquiring into an individual's pronouns is absolutely cruel. But these revelations have ignited calls for an urgent review of NHS guidance matters into gender. I am joined now by author and broadcaster Ella Whelan. Ella, thank you very much. Tough to know where to start on this one because there's so much guff, isn't there? But what do you make of the NHS's gender guidance and then blaming our gender inequality on colonialism?
Well, first of all, it's rather odd that the National Health Service, which is supposed to be bothered about how people engage with its services in this country, should be making sort of international statements about how people deal with gender and sexuality, or whatever. This is a kind of a policy that could be lifted from a university students' society. It's probably about as well written as would come out of something like that. And, you said it in your introduction, it seems like a giant waste of time. And the reason why it's a waste of time is because there have been, transgender patients might have increased in number, but they haven't just been discovered in the last year or so. There have been people with that kind of issue and those kind of requirements for a very long time. And staff have been pretty good at dealing with people, actually. There's been a sort of, I've spoken to quite a few nurses and doctors who, off the record say that they're really quite insulted at the idea that they have to have this kind of policy and guidance breathing down their neck, telling them how to formally interact with their patients, when actually bedside manner and managing people's personal lives as well as their medical difficulties is part and parcel of being a medical professional, and they're already very good at that. So there's that kind of aspect of this being really kind of hectoring for staff. But it's also the case that this isn't just a silly policy. It has very real ramifications for, whether or not women's wards can be women only, whether or not the way in which it's always about women, but whether in which the way women interact with health professionals is in a kind of normal basis, or whether it's littered with all this ridiculous language. The funny thing is, a lot of the discussion about gender neutral language that takes place in the most obviously gendered area of healthcare, which is maternity care. I don't really know why there's such an obsession with gender neutralizing maternity care when it has such cruel and cold ramifications for removing words like mother, mum and woman from that particular area of a woman's life. So it's not surprising, but it's certainly depressing.
Ella, thank you very much. I didn't want to interrupt you there because I just thought it was an absolutely fabulous monologue that no doubt will be clipped and pumped out on social media far and wide. Ella, thank you. Ella Whelan there. Broadcaster, author, speaker of Common Sense. Look, with me again is my panel, historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop, and the Bow Group's research fellow, Benjamin Loughnane. Tessa, why is our NHS focusing on colonialism and gender when it should just be saving lives?
I would like to... Is my voice going to work for this? I don't know.
We'll give it a go.
I need the NHS.
No, we'll go to Benjamin.
I would like to suggest that of all the problems facing our NHS, this is not a major deal, and I'm surprised we're talking about it. 7.5 million people are on waiting lists. This is an issue which affects a very small proportion of the population, but there are people who, for example, are born with intersex traits, about 1 in every 2,000 babies, and we need to have appropriate language, and we need to know how they should be looked after and referred to.
Just Tessa raised a good point there, which is, when we're talking about stories like this, and I would argue when we're talking about things like the Channel, we're missing maybe the bigger issues. The Channel one would be the issue we're missing is net migration. This, I would argue, the issue we're missing is the state of the NHS.
Well, I think that's actually part of the problem. I think it's why it's important to talk about this, which is why is the NHS spending time focusing on this when they've got that waiting list, when they've got those issues, when it affects so few people in comparison to the larger systemic issues which are making the NHS not function. I think it won't be long before there's a huge gap in the market for a private healthcare provider who says we're not doing any of that nonsense, we're not focusing on policing language and talking about, focusing on a very small minority of people. We're just going to do healthcare the way it should be done. I think, that's my issue.
One of the issues is that the contention, and this was an article in a right-leaning newspaper today, was that, why are doctors assigning gender? Well, at birth, sometimes it's not clear.
Sometimes?
Sometimes it's not
Very
clear.
rarely.
Yeah.
1 in every 2,000
that's
children.
very rare.
In fact, 1.7 exhibit these intersex traits. And when it goes wrong, that can have massive lifelong ramifications.
Can I ask,
for
is
the
that
person
1 in
involved.
2,000 children in the UK or in the world? Do we know? I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Interestingly, 1 in 2,000 in the world.
In the
human
world,
beings who were born with intersex traits. And these are referred to, there's about 60 conditions that leave somebody or a newborn baby with one of these. It's called the diagnosis of disorder of sexual development. And in some countries, for example, quite recently in places like Nigeria, if you had these intersex traits, it was seen as a bad omen. Babies were being murdered. So I think we need to be really careful about language, actually, and the way in which we respect an individual.
Benjamin, dare I say, this is the kind of tosh that you get when you feel compelled to... It is tosh. When you feel compelled to employ people who work in diversity and equality and inclusion jobs, and inclusivity jobs, I should say, and then they feel like they've got to do something, and then you end up with someone giving a PowerPoint presentation.
I think one of the issues is that it's such a minority issue, and while it is an absolutely valid concern and people need to deal with it, and the NHS does need to deal with this, you've also got a cancer screening backlog in the hundreds of thousands.
Why can't you have guidelines?
No, but you can have guidelines, but it shouldn't be the entire occupation of so many people in the NHS who are massively overpaid. It should be something that's done and dealt with, and then we need to focus on getting those cancer screening backlogs down.
Tessa, that I find that NHS staff find very difficult to answer when I put it to them, which is, why is a diversity and inclusion manager paid 4 times what a nurse is? I mean, that's where they go, I shouldn't be backing this.
I agree. We've always overpaid white-collar workers. I think that there's a massive gender issue about what nurses are paid. 90% of them are women, by the way, and I would like to see them paid much more. But it's very easy for you, as I'm presuming here, a straight white man who had a little willy when he was born and it was all quite straightforward.
Thank you very much.
And now it's doing very well, thank you very much. It's very easy for you to say, oh, well, this black and white issue that is gender really shouldn't be clogging up the NHS. But the point is that our health service is the first point of contact for babies who are born where intersex traits means it's not that straightforward. By the way, as it is for me, presumably Ben and you, call Patrick.
All right, I can hear the clamour of my fiancé saying he didn't just have a little willy when he was born, but there we go. Now, we reached out to the Hospital Trust and got a reply from University Hospital Sussex NHS Foundation Trust. They couldn't confirm or deny whether these guidelines were pushed out to staff within their trust. Thank you very much to my panel for joining me this evening. Coming up, I will be talking to a London councillor who escaped from Afghanistan 2 years ago and missed the Taliban's takeover. And I'm just asking the question, and in fact, I've got quite a few facts about what happened in Afghanistan and the retreat there. I'm just asking, was it all worth it? Was it all really worth it?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Welcome back. I am continuing to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg this evening, and this is indeed State of the Nation. As ever, you've been getting in touch in your droves. Thank you very, very much. This one was on the inclusivity issue in the NHS and why they are telling staff that colonialism is to blame for gender issues in this country. There's probably someone over there who needs saving. Charles says, why can't we just stop the diversity and inclusivity nonsense that is harming this country? Charles, we can't do it simply because it's become such a massive industry. That's what it is. People have so much money at stake in it now that we're going to plough on with it relentlessly until the inevitable death spiral that becomes us. But, moving on. Afghanistan celebrates a major national holiday today, although not one that you and I could be expected to join in with. For the 15th of August marks 2 years to the day that Kabul fell to the Taliban takeover. After 20 years attempting to neutralise the Taliban threat, the US was forced into a humiliating withdrawal and evacuation with scenes reminiscent of the fall of Saigon. But what state is the country on which the US spent $1 trillion now in? The Taliban's promises to exert a softer rule have been broken, with girls' rights curtailed, a ban on female education, public executions obviously have resumed, and chants of, and I'm not joking now, death to the West, death to Europeans, and death to America took place outside the former US embassy today. Now, it appears that Britain and America's foreign policy objectives in the region have obviously failed. It's worth noting as well, I think, isn't it, that around 470 British soldiers lost their lives, several thousand, 7,500 actually, were injured, some desperately badly so. 111,000 Afghan civilians were killed, 64,500 Afghan soldiers were killed on top of all of that. And out of Afghanistan's population, around 5.7 million are now displaced. Has it worked? Was it worth it? Joining me now is London councillor Peymana Assad, who was in Kabul and forced to flee as the city fell. Thank you very much. Was it worth it?
I think that's an interesting question to be asking ourselves actually at this moment in time, especially considering that over the last 2 years we've seen a brutal Taliban regime in Afghanistan, all the things that you mentioned, the curtailing of women's rights, girls' rights, men and boys being under attack, killed, tortured, disappeared because they opposed Taliban rule. But I think the thing that gives me comfort and the thing that I think most Brits should try and remember is that over the last 20 years, girls went to school, women had the right to work, and men and boys were also had access to their rights. They worked very closely with the British Ministry of Defence, with the British Foreign Office, were trained actually at Sandhurst, many of these Afghan army officers. Do I think it was worth it? Yes. Do I think that it was the morally right thing to do to go into Afghanistan and get rid of the Taliban regime? Yes. Do I think that things could have been done differently? Yes. Do I think that we should have listened to Afghans and we should have understood that country in a different way? Yes. So I think that there was lots of things that went wrong, but I also think that lots of things went right. And I think that the blame really lies with the opening of the Taliban office in 2013 in Qatar. The blame lies with the US Taliban deal in February 2020. The blame lies with the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. I think that is the thing that we need to regret. That's the thing we need to look back on.
I mean, I don't doubt anything that you said there, by the way. A lot of people at the time were wondering why there wasn't more resistance to the Taliban from a lot of Afghan troops that we had trained. Your response to that?
So I think what we need to understand is that when President Biden set in the deadline for the withdrawal, the 31st of August 2021, with that he also told contractors who were supplying and fixing Afghan military equipment and helicopters, specifically those that were doing airstrikes against the Taliban across the country. The other thing is that the Taliban struck deals with tribal elders that was facilitated by the Pakistani intelligence service across the country. Pakistan's involvement in and interference in Afghanistan over the last 20 years is something that's not spoken about. And if you have a neighboring country that is providing, sourcing, funding a terrorist organization, it's really difficult. A guerrilla warfare, technically, it's really difficult for the Afghan army to continue to fight back when contractors pull out and those that you thought were your allies that would stand by you, telling you to surrender and to not fight.
Just one last one, if that's all right, Peymana. The families of British soldiers who died over there, it's a mixed bag when you listen to their reactions now. A lot of them are very scathing about Tony Blair. What would you say to them if they are feeling as though actually they just wish we'd have never gone and that their son's life, was lost for nothing, really?
What I would say to them is that I obviously feel their pain and that their loss can never ever be replaced, but that the change that was brought to Afghanistan over the last 20 years was 100% worth it. It's why Afghan women are now on the streets of Kabul still resisting and protesting against the Taliban regime, why women are being tortured in Taliban prisons, why men and boys are being disappeared. It is because of that last 20 years intervention, that last 20 years support that we gave to the Afghan people.
Look, Peymana, thank you very, very much. Peymana Assad there, who was in Kabul, forced to flee as the city fell, giving her roundup on, that question of the day, really, which was it all worth it? Look, I'm very quickly now going to whiz you over to Dan Wootton, who's got a bumper show for you this evening. What's on?
Patrick, brilliant show. Well, we've got our Ben Leo investigating why Disney is so determined to destroy Snow White by going woke.
Fantastic. I absolutely love Ben Leo, by the way. He is a proper find. So, yeah, great stuff. Look, Dan will have a world of stuff coming up. Not just that, of course. I will be back tomorrow at 3 p.m, actually. I will see you then. Make sure you stay tuned for Dan Wootton, who will be absolutely box office. As always, I'll see you tomorrow, people.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of Weather on